So I don't know if it's just me, but for the past almost like a year at this point, the game has been pretty stale. The most recent sets didn't really change that much to the dynamic of the game because they either added some new decks or made some older decks a little better or added some new staples. For example, Duelist Nexus gave purely like one card, which was E Purely Noir, which made Sleepy Memory much better, which also made the deck infinitely better than it was before, and then it gave Unchained a lot of a crazy, insane support. And then Age of Overlord gave the Rescue Ace deck the Sinful Spells engine, which is also splashable in like 10 billion other decks, as well as Typhon and SP Little Knight. But honestly, all this really did was just make the same decks better while not really addressing the main problem that this game had for like the past year. And I plan on tackling this subject on today's video because I do believe that a lot of players share the same opinion I do. But before we go any further, I would really appreciate you if you could smash the like and subscribe button for me real quick. Alright, so first things first, let me define what I mean when I say that the game is stale. I'm not talking about formats being completely identical with the exact same decks always being the best, because we have seen a few shifts in competitive domination. So for example, Kashtira was the best deck for like pretty much half a year, if not more, and then we got Unchained, and now we've got Rescue Ace, although we can say that Unchained is still really good. To put it simply, what I'm trying to say is that it doesn't really matter if these decks are slightly different in how they look because they all share one major similarity with each other. They are all mid-range decks. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term, a mid-range deck is basically like an in-between of a control and a combo deck. So mid-range decks are less powerful than combo decks, but they do have a better grind game, but at the same time, they are more powerful than control decks while having a worse grind game than them. On the surface, this is completely fine because all it really means is that there is a playstyle for each player out there. If you are super aggressive and you like to play with your full hand and solve really complex puzzles, then you're probably more of a combo player. If you like to outplay your opponent and actually grind him out to death, then control is probably your playstyle. And if you want to be able to play every game while never really getting blown out and just being balanced overall, then you're probably a mid-range player. The issue though is the following. Mid-range decks are no longer what they used to be a few years ago. Just when you take Sword Soul and Salamangreat, for example, which I actually consider to be the two healthiest mid-range decks of all time. So these decks actually forced you to use your sense of judgment in order to make some good decisions because otherwise you were getting blown out. For example, if you're playing a deck like Sword Soul, are you trying to always search the trap card with the Chi Jiao, or are you searching the Long Wand in order to extend and go into a Baron? If you are searching the trap card, then you're playing it safe because you're basically only passing turn on 3 summons, whereas if you're going for the Long Wand, you're making the Baron on summon number 6 and you are losing to Nibiru. The issue with searching the trap card is that now you're actually a little more fragile if your opponent has a good hand, depending on what you're facing. Because without an Omni Negate, it's a little easier to crack the board, right? And also in Sword Soul, do you just always vomit your whole hand in order to make as many interruptions as possible, or do you just keep resources in your hand to make sure that you have follow play for next turn? Regardless of what you chose to do, just because you went first with Sword Soul didn't necessarily mean that you would win because the deck was inherently fair. Except for Protoss. But if you happen to lose the dice roll in the mirror match, you weren't necessarily out because the deck was extremely good going second. Sword Soul mirrors are actually very back and forth and gave everyone a chance to interact with each other. But that is not what the current mid-range decks are looking like. The Unchained deck can actually put up like 5 or 6 interruptions with only like 1 card or 2 cards, and there is no 1 card board breaker that beats it. Not to mention that the standard combo naturally gets you the follow-up that you need in order to win on turn 3 anyways. Your Caesar could trigger to search the Dark Contract, which is pretty big, and then the Sharvara can trigger to set a trap card, and then you also have the Unchained Soul of Rage to recycle back a Fiend monster from a grave to hand, and the Yama to revive back a monster. So now the thing with Unchained is that, for example, if you win the dice roll and you go first, if you open your 2-card combo, you don't really have to think about anything. You just play it out and it just solves all of your issues naturally. It's not like Sword Soul where you play it out differently because the rest of your hand might be a little fragile and you need to really think about your follow-up play. Everything is already included in the package, you don't have to think. And because of the fact that the interruptions are so generic and cover so much ground, you're never really in a position where you can't really do anything against a certain deck. The only moments when decks like Unchained really have to change is when new trends emerge that make previous combos a little riskier. So for example, the existence of monster stealing cards like Change of Heart can force players to develop a combo line where they now have to destroy their Unchained Soul of Rage and then recycle back the Sharvara in order to be able to respond to the Change of Heart. So now if you're targeting the Caesar, they can destroy it with a Sharvara in hand, and then they can use the effect of Yama, revive back the Unchained Soul of Rage, and they're still fine. But in this instance, what happens is that everybody is made aware of the combo and starts copying it anyways. And again, it remains the exact same 2-card combo, so you don't really have to go out of your way to do it. The Rescue Ace deck is pretty much the exact same. I mean, you have a bunch of 1 or 2 card combos, you can play through hand traps depending on what you drew, and the deck is super predictable. But if you're going first with Rescue Ace and your opponent doesn't have any hand traps, well, congratulations, because your 1-card combo leads to 4 back row and a bunch of cards in hand on the field. Again, because of the fact that the commitment is so small, you don't really have to lose anything and really think about anything because you always have a follow-up built in your engine. And again, let's not pretend like Fire King is any different because 1 or 2 cards leads to like 5 interruptions and they can also play like 12 plus hand traps. Not to mention that literally every mid-range deck out there is playing 3 Prosperity, which increases the consistency by a long shot. And again, because of the fact that everybody can play with a bare minimum, everybody can play the exact same non-engine cards and sometimes even the same engine cards as well. Wow, so exciting and refreshing, no way. But yeah, basically what I am saying is mid-range decks are no longer what they used to be back in the days, and they are looking way more like combo decks, but at the same time way more resilient and way more grindy. Mid-range decks being able to actually put up unbreakable boards and immediately winning the game on turn 1 is completely new when you think about it, because back in 2019, that wasn't the case with Salamangreat. Just because you open Spinny Gazelle and like a hand trap, for example, didn't necessarily mean that you won because you're not making like an unbreakable, crazy, insane board. Like there wasn't one card combo that was making like infinite billion interruptions because you needed like your whole hand in order to make a lot, or you could play with like 2 cards but you were making less interruptions, but on the bright side you could play hand traps. Now forget about it, this is no longer the case. You can play with 1 card and play 12 hand traps and make like 10 interruptions, no problem. And the reason why I'm saying that every deck kind of just looks identical is because everybody has the luxury of playing like 12 hand traps regardless of their playstyle. Like even though Labyrinth is a trap deck and should act like a trap deck and a control deck, it really just isn't the case, and it actually feels way more like a mid-range deck because it can play so many hand traps and it's also really fast. Now the Mana Dome and Infernoble decks actually look like combo decks, but when you really think about it, they're just like more mid-range decks because they also get to play a lot of hand traps and, well, at least they're 1 and 2 card combos when they go uninterrupted. But even if you are playing through hand traps, it's not even that impressive because you can just memorize the sequencing. The only true hardcore combo decks are Tearlaments and Mechanical this format. Tearlaments actually force you to really think with each hand you draw because every combo is completely different and it all depends on what you mill and what you have in your hand. Mechanical is pretty much the same. I mean, the deck is extremely complicated to play and there are a lot of wrong routes that you can go into and a lot of ways to get blown out by hand traps that you have no business losing to. In my opinion, these are the only 2 decks in the current format that really kind of deserve the power level that they have because even though they're really strong, they're very complicated, and they typically don't really allow you to have a lot of room for non-engine cards. They're also some of the only decks that I can think of that can actually play through boards naturally with just their engine going second, which is pretty wild. Unlike the mid-range decks, which currently are low-risk, high-reward decks, these combo decks are actually high-risk, high-reward decks, but in the real way. Again, if we want mid-range decks to actually stick to their true nature, they should be mid-risk, mid-reward. I mean, they're mid-range decks, they're not like insane range decks. Now, there is one more thing I wanted to discuss in this video. I've been keeping a close eye out on the topping deck list and the feature matches from YCS Bologna, and it just confirmed something that I already kinda knew. There's no real innovation and no true secret solution to this streamlined format where the key is doing a lot with very little and being able to play billions of hand traps and also play through hand traps. I wasn't impressed or surprised by anything or anyone that I saw, and even the winning deck list that Joshua piloted wasn't anything new when you think about it. Not to discredit him or anything, but the Bestial Runic deck was already a thing a few months ago. And it's sad to say, but his victory with the deck didn't really disprove any negative aspects about the format either. The dice roll still completely matters, as we have seen on the feature match against Pag, because if he were to actually lose the dice roll against Infernoble, he definitely would have lost game 1. And drawing hand traps is still a necessity because your engine itself is usually just not enough to clear your opponent's board. And drawing the right combination of cards seriously matters as well. You can't just have like your 1 card combo going second and call it a day. Like literally every single time I saw players win going second, they were always using like 5 or 6 cards, which is ridiculous. Like, all they needed to lose was to draw, like, a Garnet or 2, and then they were completely screwed. Like, you basically need to draw perfect now if you want to have a chance going second, which I actually find just to be unfortunate. Now, outside of this, I've actually witnessed a lot of illegal moves and unintentional misplays, I want to say, by a lot of players, and it's a little concerning. I obviously don't think that people have bad intentions when they do these kind of moves. I just give them the benefit of the doubt and I assume that it's just unintentional. But I guess it just shows that not everyone has really had the time to really know and understand their deck on a very deep level. I don't know, maybe this is the case because people just feel like they have to change decks every 5 seconds because of the format. I don't know, I'm just saying at this point. But yeah, that's all I had for this video right here. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys very soon. Peace.